big news today in Raleigh. The llama is back. No, the llama. It's actually the llama. Sorry. Or would that be Yama? Because it's two L's. An actual llama, the Liberty Llama, back at the State House. Well, actually, it was yesterday, so you missed it. But look, they bring the llama every year. It's the Liberty Llama, and they try to get people to agree to do a convention of states in exchange for hugs and with the llama and opportunities to pet the llama. It seems to be working because every year they get a little bit closer to getting this thing done. For folks who are not aware, a convention of states is how state governments can take back control of an out-of-control federal government. And the state legislatures can do this thanks to the Founding Fathers writing the 5th article of the Constitution, which reads, "The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments." All right, so that's the first part. So you have two options there. I know this is written in, 1700s language, lingo, but it's still very clear. Even though these many centuries later, it is still obvious what they're saying, that if 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate want to propose an amendment to the Constitution, they can do so. You got to get the votes. You got to have 2/3 of the Senate and 2/3 of the House. So that's where a constitutional amendment can originate, which is why whenever Democrats and the media, but I repeat myself, start pushing for gun control laws, like their beef is with the Second Amendment. So if you want to change the U.S. Constitution, there's a process that you follow, and this is the process right here in Article 5. This is how you do it. You get 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate. You try to propose a constitutional amendment. In this case, to repeal the Second Amendment. That's the way you would do that. Oh, what's that you say? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you don't have the votes to do that. Interesting. Okay. Well, then pound sand. Right? That's how that works. Now, there's another way to go. The other way to go is a route that does not run through the Congress, because the founders realized that if you just leave it up to the federal government to initiate constitutional changes, well, they may never get around to doing that. They may never do it because they may be enjoying their power too much. And the founders, having come from the several states, knew that the states were the seminal authority that created the federal government. And so, therefore, they needed to have an avenue to change the Constitution to their liking from the state level. So, that's the second part. The application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the states, or of the several states, they call it. So you need 2/3 of the states to say, hey, we want to have a constitutional convention, an Article 5 convention. Right? We want to call this convention. And that's how you propose amendments. It says it right there. Shall propose amendments. Not that they get passed, not that they can throw out the whole Constitution, but you can propose amendments. But you first have to call for the convention to propose the amendments. In either case, they say, it shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states. Okay? So to call a convention, you need 66% of the states to call it. And then if you want to change the Constitution with any kind of amendments, you need 75%. So it's an even higher bar to change the Constitution with 75% of the states agreeing. And so those numbers are 34 and 38, respectively. You need 34 states to call it, and then you would need 38 states to adopt any kind of change. Okay? 34 states pass an application for a convention to propose amendments. Then the states choose all of their delegates. Whatever amendments are passed at that convention, by whatever means they want to come up with to, every state's going to get one vote. They propose the amendments, but then those states will have to ratify by the same process as any constitutional amendment. So there's always this argument that there's going to be a runaway convention. That's always what you hear from people that are, and this comes from conservatives. They call it the con and all this stuff. Constitutional con, right? If you are worried about state legislatures proposing constitutional amendments, and in this case, we know what they're proposing because they've written them out. Fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office for its officials and for members of Congress. Those are the three items that are being proposed for the calling of the convention. And if you think that this process is somehow going to, quote, run away, then why do you think Congress hasn't already done this stuff? If you're worried, for example, this is the one I always hear, is like, oh my gosh, they could propose like a repeal of the Second Amendment. They could. California could come in there with New York, rolling heavy. Like, look at all of our delegates here. We're New York. We're California. Yeah, you're still just 2 votes. Oh, and by the way, you still need to get it through this convention. Oh, and by the way, even if you do that and it goes to the Congress to put it up for ratification, you still need to get 38 states to vote to repeal the Second Amendment, which once again, if you didn't have the votes at the Senate and the House level, why do you think you're going to get the votes at the state legislative levels, right? The Democrats do not control enough states for that to happen. You would have a runaway Congress right now. But we don't see that. I mean, we see it in other areas, yes, obviously, like with the fiscal policies and the runaway spending, sure. The refusal to do term limits, sure. Protection of their own power base, sure. But that's why you want the state legislatures to come in and say, you know what, we're gonna add some more checks on you guys up at that level. We're gonna rein in some of that runaway spending. We're gonna term limit some of you guys. Make sure you're balancing your budgets and the like. It's a way to keep the federal government in check. I don't have any concerns about a runaway convention. I don't. They did a mock convention, actually. No runaway convention. They didn't even get agreement on all of the stuff that they were proposing. But here's the thing. The closer you get to actually calling one of these things, the more likely the feds are to move on this stuff. They start proposing things as just law when they see a convention of states getting ready to form. They get the message. Hundreds of convention of states proponents gathered outside the legislative buildings yesterday in Raleigh, advocating for North Carolina to become the next state to call for a convention of the states to address issues within the federal government. Activists with the group Convention... Oh, that's interesting. Why do they get called activists? Wouldn't they be advocates? One man's advocate is another man's activist, I guess. They filled the lawn outside the legislative buildings to rally around a constitutional solution given to the states to rein in the federal government's power. Brianna Kramer at CarolinaJournal.com reports in attendance. Convention of State Action. That's the organization that's pushing this. The co-founders Mark Meckler and Michael Farris, along with former U.S. Senator Rick Santorum. They did not play kickball this year. That is my understanding. They played last year. They did not play this year. The 3 leaders spoke to the crowd and encouraged the grassroots to continue fighting to get the resolution over the finish line. Right now, there are 19 states that have passed a resolution calling for amendments to be debated and to then hopefully, come out of that convention of states to go for full ratification. Term limits, fiscal restraints, and limits to the size and jurisdiction of the federal government. All eyes are on North Carolina as the state could become the 20th to push for a convention. We need 34 total. We have 19. The North Carolina House passed House Joint Resolution 235 last year, And officials say the Senate is prepared to move forward with the resolution any day now. The resolution states that the convention is, quote, limited to proposing amendments to the U.S. Constitution that impose fiscal restraints. I already mentioned that. The term limits and the... And to limit the jurisdiction of the federal government. Also in attendance was the Liberty Llama, which was a draw for many members, staffers, and individuals walking throughout the Capitol complex. I don't know whose idea it was to bring this llama around, but that was a great idea. Those many years ago, when the llama first began attending these events, I'm sure somebody's got, a farm, they've got this llama, and they get some sort of a tax credit or something for it. But whatever. They bring the llama around, and then everybody wants to go see the llama. And then while you're there, it's like, hey, let me talk to you about a convention of states while you're hugging the llama.